Okay, now we are going to move on to the top end of the engine. If you haven't already, and keep in mind that actually, as I said, I'd like to do all of this on the bike itself. So that's completely up to you if you want to do that or not. But I do it while it's on the engine itself. By the way, I put the gear back on so that it weighs the engine down so that it doesn't keep falling forward. So I could do this video. So if you're wondering why that appeared there, that's why. So while that the engine is still on the bike, if it is, I cracked these valve covers loose. These are 17 millimeters, and they're actually quite stubborn. They're really fiddly to try and get a good grip on with a spanner and holding the engine by itself. So I cracked these loose if the engine is still on the bike. So let's remove these now. I've already loosened these. And what I also like to do is, and I've done this for the video already in case you're wondering, they're not this loose normally. I cracked these nuts loose too, the adjusters. These are the valve tappets. The tappet adjusters. They're 9 millimeters, and so crack those loose and undo them. Of course, if you aren't planning on readjusting, I recommend readjusting your valves every single time you pull the head off. That's just me, but if you're not really, if you're lazy, I guess, you don't need to, but I'm going to, but I'll crack the nuts loose and then do that to both sides. And so undo this one and undo this. So undo the tappets. You don't have to pull them out all the way. If you want to, I guess you can, and pull the valve covers off. Okay, next I will pull off the, now at any point, of course, as I said, you can remove the engine from the bike, so it's just totally up to you of when you want to do this. Remove this bolt and crack these two loose. This is the oil cover block-off plate. It redirects oil from the oil pump, pumps it up to here, pumps through here, and then it feeds into the camshaft. And also you see the larger fins. Yours might look different. Yours might be a little trapezoid. You might have short fins. It's just, if it looks different, you know, it's specific to the heads on your bike. Different heads have different block-off plates, and so remove those bolts if you want. Okay, now I've removed these two bolts, as you can see, but I've only loosened this one about 5 turns, 4 to 5 turns, whatever. I've just loosened it a little bit, and the reason I have done that is because this cover right here is actually held in by the bolt, which goes all the way through, so it goes all the way through the camshaft, all the way through the cylinder head, and it pulls down this cover. So, what does that mean? Well, if you want to knock, this is my little trick that I like to do to knock the cover loose. If you give the nut a good tap, what's going to happen is it's actually going to knock the cover loose to the other side. I think it came loose. Yeah, you can see now the cover has worked itself loose. So now what you can do is undo the bolt like so, and the cover will come off. So let's do that now. Okay, you see, so we have knocked it loose and the cover has come off, and now you can pull this bolt out, or in this case if the plate falls off, then you can pull this off as well. Now my gasket, this, as I said, I've taken part of the engine apart, so your gasket's not going to look brand new like this. I put part of the engine back together to illustrate how to disassemble it, but nonetheless, if you, yeah, this is what you're going to see come off. So there are those two things, and that is it for now. We're going to go to the other side of the engine. Okay, what we're going to do now is we are going to crack these two bolts loose. I find it more helpful to leave the spark plug in the head so that you have a little bit of compression to help you in holding the cam wheel steady. Putting the socket on here, whacking the whatever it is ratchet that you've got and that has worked for me most of the time. If you have a really hard time, then what you can do is grab hold of the flywheel and try and have somebody hold it and then give it a good few whacks, if you can manage that. But as I've said, most of the time that works for me. Just getting the wrench and then hitting it hard on this side, trying to keep the engine steady, and it usually works at getting the bolts off. So undo these bolts. Okay, for now I'm going to put those here because all these covers are going to go in one little area. Now, so I'll take a socket and a wrench and I start tapping it on that side, and I find that often is enough to knock it loose off of the camshaft. So it might be counterintuitive, you're thinking I'm hitting it towards that, but work the camshaft, work the wheel loose till now I'm moving it back and forth, and it's actually, see, there you go, it had broken it loose from the camshaft, and it so tapping it knocked it loose, and then do a little bit of a, you know, pull here and there, and it comes right off. You're going to want to remove this wheel, as you can't pull the cylinder head off with it. Well, actually you can, but I'll pull the wheel off anyway. There's no need to keep it in here. The main thing you need to do is just unloop it from the cam chain, because obviously the cam chain is going to hold it in. So you just you work one side of the cam chain off, and then it comes off, it slides off, and you will be good to go. Of course, put these parts in the appropriate place. And now what you're ready to do is undo the head bolts, the head nuts. These are 10mm, but notice you can't actually fit a socket in here, even if it's very, very thin. So this you're going to need a 10mm ring spanner for. This bolt is actually a little bit different looking. Usually they both look like this. And so miscellaneous hardware sometimes makes it into old engines like this one. This bolt just happened to be the correct size, and so that's why I used it. I'm not sure if it matters on these engines, but when I undo them also in a crisscross pattern. I trained as a mechanic on Volkswagen, and so when I was taught to undo the head to avoid the head warping, is you undo it in a crisscross pattern. So I start here, and then I go here, and then I go here. Let me do this like this. So I'll start here, and instead of going in a roundabout circle, or square in this case, go from here to here to here, and then across. So that's because it undoes, it releases torque down on the head rather evenly. Now, as I said, this is a single cylinder, and I don't think it matters. And also, sorry, what I do like to do is I undo a little bit. So I will, let's see if I, yeah, no, it's not going to work. But I undo a little bit of the nut, maybe from here, and I'll undo it a quarter turn, and then I'll go over to this knot and do a quarter turn and a quarter turn. So it's still torqued down, but not completely, and then I will do that again. This is because when you're in a car and you are tightening down the nuts, you don't want to tighten down the bolts or whichever, you don't want to warp the head, because too much torque in one place can warp the head, and it doesn't seal properly, and you blow the head gasket. Again, I think it's a lot less important with single cylinder engines, so I'm not entirely sure, but I do it in 2 or 3 stages. I'll undo a little bit each way, continue on in a crisscross pattern until it's completely loose. So, okay, now the hardware is removed, as you can see. Just note that you're going to have one copper washer, and that's going to go there, and you're going to have the open nut, which is here. So in case for some reason you're watching this video and you just want to know what goes where, that is what goes where. There goes one of the nuts. I'll pick that up, but again, put the hardware in the little group. We'll put you in a baking tin later, and now you can undo this bolt right here. I'm not going to show you that process. Okay, so at this point, oh, and by the way, if you remove the nuts and for some reason you forget that the washer is still on there, just check to make sure you get all the washers off. Sometimes I've seen people, they they forget that they take a nut off, put it in their haste, and then they forget there's a washer on there because it's kind of stuck. So just be aware of that. All right. Most of the time, however, your head is not going to come off cleanly, so you're going to have to encourage it. Poling is not going to work. Okay, here's the method of what I like to do. I like to get a flathead screwdriver and wedge it between here. Okay, because this is not it's not a really visible side of the finish, and it's not pretty anyway. So you can get in here and then hold your engine and give it a good amount of torque and pry it loose. But don't, whatever you do, try and wedge it between the mating surfaces of the gasket, okay? But between the cylinder and the cylinder head. By the way, if you see there's a slight gap in there, that's because this head is already, it's actually come loose. I have a metal head gasket in here, so that actually comes off very easily. But as I said, to provide the torque, go between here. Don't touch the mating surfaces like here. Go between the two fins and wrench the head loose like that. See? And then once you get it to that point, what you can do is, as you're holding it, trying to pull it off. Okay, so while you're pulling, tap it here, okay, on the side of the intake, because you see it sticks out a little bit. Come on, focus, focus. There you go. And you say tap this side of the intake with at the most with a wooden or rubber mallet, so you don't crack the head. And while you're pulling, and that should be more than enough to help you remove the cylinder head. But this should actually slide off with one hand. There you go. It's not usually this easy, but like I said, this has been disassembled before. Okay. If you are storing your head, there's going to be oil that drips out of it, and it'll make a mess of things, so I recommend putting that on some sort of cardboard. Or if you don't want to mess up your table, obviously if you're on a workbench, you know, it's you're going to be expecting it, but if you put it down, it's going to leak a bit of oil everywhere. So you can put it down on a set of paper towels over here. This is an easily cleanable surface, so I'm not going to bother because this head doesn't have hardly any oil in it. But yeah, just heads up with that. Also, this valve cover, usually the gasket adheres to it. As I've said, I've taken it apart. That's why the gasket looks brand new, because it is. So you're going to want to keep track of this. This is something you're going to need to clean off, especially if there's any spare gasket material left on it. I'm not going to show you how to remove the valves unless you have some shop do it, because you need some special tools to install the valve springs. But this is something you can do by yourself, so I'm going to show you this. What with the head, here's what I do. I undo the tappets very, very far. They don't need to be out, but undo them very, very loosely. Unscrew both screws, the nut and the screw. It's going to be both. Undo them very far, and then what you do is, this is where the rocker shafts are, and there's an easy way to remove these. If you don't know this, the rocker shaft's are actually threaded inside. You can get a bolt, thread it into the rocker shaft, a few threads, and then pull it out, and it will come out. But I'm going to show you also that this usually works too. You take any kind of threaded bolt, like the one that you can't focus on, and there you go, and put it inside the rocker shaft. Make sure you get it into the rocker shaft, by the way. Don't try and scratch this part of the housing. You have to go all the way in. There you go. And then what you do is you push down on the bolt so that it grabs the threads, and then you pull towards you. You see how that's working? Because the threads, you see, are grabbing. So this thread, even though you're not threading it in, it has something to lock onto. And then you can pull the shaft out like that, and then the rocker arm is going to fall down. So that is the easy way to remove the rocker shaft and the rocker arm. Now, before you continue though, I'm going to do one side. You see this side is the intake. See, that's where your carburetor, the intake manifold goes, and of course the carburetor after that. mark which one is the intake. I've seen people cross this up and they've put the exhaust side on the intake side, but because of the pattern of wear that is going to occur from your tappet, see there's your tappet onto the face of the valve, it's going to be sort of worn in its own little way. It's going to be, I guess you could say, broken in, and so you want to keep that the same. So mark which side is which. So this is the intake side, and so I'm going to put it on a special place that says intake. I'm going to just put it here for now, but I haven't forgotten. Okay, just want to make sure that you know that that is the intake side. And then I'm going to repeat the same process with the exhaust side. So locking the threads in, pulling the rocker shaft. That was very easy. Sometimes it takes it's a bit harder than that. Okay, I'll be honest. So you might need a bit of, you might slip a few times, you might not make it, just heads up. Lastly, now that the rocker shaft is off, what I do to remove the camshaft, usually this thing will just fall out. I mean, what you can do is just spin the lobes this way and then use the lobes to sort of push up against the cam, and it will fall off. And then you can just grab it and, you know, be a little bit careful, and the cam will slide out. For some reason, if it's a little bit stubborn, what you can do is you can put a bolt in here, thread it a little bit, and then grab the head of the bolt with some pliers or whatnot. So inspect your camshaft for wear, all of that good stuff. There's many other videos that can explain it better and more detailed than I will be able to do in a one-take video like this. So with that, I'm just going to put this off to the side, and let's organize the parts that we have taken off before we continue. It's important that we are organized. If we don't continue, I know how excited you get when you're taking something apart, but every stage of the way, what I like to do is, you know, tell myself, hold on, I'm going to organize these parts, make sure they're all in the appropriate place, and then, only then, will I continue. So let's organize the parts. Okay, we have organized things that in a coherent order. I have a small table. This is the only table I've got. You notice if you look at this, it's so easy to tell what is what, but if everything is in a big ball of parts that we have created in our haste just because we are so excited to work on something, it's going to be very difficult for us to grab. We waste so much time missing parts here and there, because, or looking for parts that here and there, excuse me, if we can't, one, you can't clearly see it, but when you organize something, it's very, very easy to pick out what is what. By the way, I also like to wrap the cam in paper towels as well, because if you happen to ding it with something or hit it with something, you can actually damage the face of the cam, and so that's something I really do like to be careful of. So I wrap the cam in paper towel as well, and you can see we have split up all the hardware into each side of what goes where, making a note of intake and the exhaust rocker. This is a little bit unstable. You can easily swap each one, and you can cross it up, and you can't tell which is which because they both physically fit on one side or the other. What I do, I find it a lot better to kind of tape a tag. I take a piece of tape and wrap it around like a little label, and then that's a bit better to do if you're moving parts around constantly, but you understand the idea. And of course, lastly, I'm not going to show you how to remove the valve springs because you might not have a valve spring compressor so that you can reinstall these. Any type of basic shop should be able to remove them and check your valves for you. As I say, just look at how to replace valves in any motorcycle head, as long as it's not a Ducati or something, and you will be able to understand how to do it. Okay, onto the barrel. What I'll do is, because there are loose parts, by the way, your O-ring might have fallen out, okay? So if the O-ring has fallen out, I don't recommend reusing these anyway, unless you have very, very few kilometers and hours on your engine. But if it's fallen out, obviously if you've used it for a while, just replace them. They're very cheap. You can order extra ones if you do lots of top-end rebuilds. I want to mention though, you might have a anti-crush washer, which is for the larger bore of the oil return feed in the head gasket. So you might have a larger ring than this, and it has a washer like this inside it. If you do, it looks like this, so don't lose that. Just be aware that you might have that. There is if you have a O-rings type of seal on your engine like this, you will have this umbrella seal in here, and this obviously is reusable, not the ring part, but the umbrella, the type of umbrella seal like this, and it's going to be sitting in there, and so don't forget that. Then what I'll do is I'll just pull the head gasket off. However, if you have this is a reusable head gasket. This one's multi-layered. Oh yes, by the way, if you also have a cam seal, it usually comes out like this, so pull out the cam seal, and drop it on the floor just like that. It's imperative you drop it on the floor, otherwise you won't look like an idiot. Okay, so cam seal, but you might have an engine that does not have this, so if you don't have that, don't worry. Most engines actually don't have that. Anyway, if you have a steel head gasket, pull it loose, but if you have a graphite head gasket, it's going to be stock and you're going to have to cut it off. One thing to pay attention to though is that you're going to have these locating dowels which are supposed to sit in the barrel like so. They can get stuck in the head gasket, so when you pull the gasket off, you're going to have two of them. You're going to have one here and one here. This one doesn't have that one, right? Oh yeah, it does, excuse me, I just didn't see it. So you have these two, so keep track of those so that you don't lose them, because they are necessary for locating the head onto the barrel. So this head gasket we're going to reuse. It's obviously in very good condition, so put the gasket over there. One of the dowels came out, the other one seems to be fairly stock in the barrel, so if you remove it with pliers, be very careful, because these deform so easily, and so you don't want to use much force to try and get it out. Okay, yeah, that one worked out very easily, but you see, I literally just did that with one hand, and just a tiny bit of wiggling back and forth. So that's all you want to do, because if you use more force than that, these will deform and they won't go back in, because they're not going to be round anymore. They're going to be, you know, elongated or whatever. So these damage very easily. These are parts that I recommend ordering extra of, because they, like I said, they damage super easily, and so it's nice to have extras of those. Now on the barrel, there's two more screws. Of course, this one you can't get a socket around it, so you're going to have to use an open-ended spanner. I will undo it. Obviously you can use a screwdriver to back out the bolt quicker, and crack this bolt loose too, so we'll go do that really quickly. Okay, this bolt is loose. Now when you back this out, it's not necessary to remove this wheel. It'll fall down, that's okay, don't worry about that, because we are taking the entire engine apart. Don't lose this aluminium washer, or sometimes they have a copper washer in here, so don't lose that, because that's necessary to seal up the barrel. However, if you do lose the aluminium washer and you don't want to get another one, you can actually rough up this side with maybe 400 grit sandpaper, and make sure the face of the bolt is clean, and you can dump some R2V on the inner lip of this bolt and then torque it down, and it will seal it. It's worked in a pinch, so in case you're wondering, so don't lose that. I'm going to put this over with this hardware, and oh, we didn't back this out yet, forgot. So, and back out the bolt holding the cylinder down. And sometimes actually what happens is the bolt is so close to the barrel that it actually jams up against the side of the barrel like this, you see. So in that case it might take a little bit of manhandling. Okay, so it's not going to work with a screwdriver, but it's working with the spanner. It's just gouging up side of the barrel. That does happen. remember, as I'm going to say it over and over again, don't stick a screwdriver in here, because it's so tempting, I know. But don't stick a screwdriver between here, try pounding it in and then wrenching it off. You damage the case, you damage the barrel. It's no good. What you can do, however, excuse me, is you see how there's that gap right there. Now I will put some, this side of the engine is slightly visible, so to keep it pretty, if you care, I would put some paper towels on this side of the engine as you stick a screwdriver in here and then pry the barrel off. So what you do, you see how I'm doing that, is I stick it between two sides which are not between the barrel and the case. I stick it between the parts that don't actually matter, and then I wrench off the barrel like that. You can, once it's starting to work its way loose, once the gasket has cracked, what you can do is actually you can start hitting it with a mallet. No, obviously rubber mallet, a brass mallet at the most. Don't use anything really hard for damaging the cylinder, especially if you have an aluminium cylinder. And you can tap on the tabs like this, and kind of alternately tap, both sides, wherever you can. You can use these holes to where your leg shield bolts in, tap them loose, because what's actually holding the barrel in is at the first little bit. I can't talk right now. The dowels are holding in the barrel for the first little bit, but the next bit, once you start getting it off, you'll actually notice that it's the cylinder. It's the rings itself. Once you get to this point, and once you've knocked it past the dowels, you can just pull with your hands, kind of wiggling it off of the piston. And so let's see if I can do this with one hand. I don't know. So you start to wiggle the. No, I can't do this. Okay, you see how this is working. At this stage, you might have an O-ring fall out. I said, of course, if it's a brand new engine or brand new set of O-rings, you can keep it, but they're cheap, and if you've used the engine for any amount of time, I recommend replacing them anyway. This might fall out, so you can grab it and drop it on the floor. I'm just not having a good day. And continue to work the cylinder off until you see the piston being exposed, which I'm just having this. Okay, I can barely do it with one hand. And all you need to do is just pull. That's it. There's no trick to anything. Just pull and work your way off of the work off the cylinder, like so. And there you go. There's your piston. The barrel. Now you can slide it all the way off and put it off to the side of wherever you're going to, where you fancy. There's going to be oil in that too, so yeah, beware for a mess. Okay, now what we're going to do is remove this circlip in here, which retains the piston pin. If you're wondering, it is a non-interference piston pin, so you don't have to use any press to get it out. So we're going to remove that clip, and then you can slide the piston out. Once you get the clip out, how I remove the, and by the way, if you're not very careful, or if you're kind of new to this and you are going to reuse your piston, as this one is going to be reused, it's actually quite good. Very low kilometers. What you can do is put a set of paper towels on here, so that when the piston rests downward, it's not going to be metal to metal contact. But I'm not going to bother, but that's just something you can do. And now what I'll do is I will take a whatever, and push. Just, you know, be careful not to scratch anything, obviously. But while you're being careful, push the pin from the other side like this, and then once the piston pin is out enough, you can lift the piston out, and you don't need to pull the pin all the way out. In fact, I like to keep the pin inside the piston if I'm going to reuse it, such as this one I will reuse. You can see that there's no real blow-by. You can see that underneath the first compression ring it's actually pretty clean, and so yeah, I'm going to be keeping and reusing this piston. So that's how you remove that. Of course, it should go without saying that you should keep this away from dirt and all of that. So I'm going to put this in a paper towel wrap up. It also acts as a good cushion in case I happen to drop it. And I'm going to actually stuff it in a box because I have a piston, I have an extra box. So when you store a good piston, that is something important. Also, do not, whatever you do, do not score these edges of the piston rings, because that will just ruin your finish, that'll ruin everything. So be careful when you put stuff away like this. Okay, you can see my piston is nice and snug in its box, that so that it will avoid damage. I wrapped it in paper towels. I also have the piston pin in there. And another thing though, when you remove these can get damaged as you remove them. Even if it doesn't look damaged, it might be weakened. So this is something I do not, I repeat, I do not recommend reusing ever. I buy a big old box of these. I go through a lot of pistons, not because I blow things up, but I experiment a lot. I like doing high compression builds, big bore kits, you name it, and so I have a lot of these. So do not reuse these. Okay, one time out, or one time in, one time out, and that's it. So that's why it's not in here. And you can also see, of course, put the hardware of what you have taken out. So keep things nice and organized, and we will go back to the stator side now. Okay, now looking at the stator side, one thing that you want to do is, before you begin pulling things off, is check to see if this is still connected. Okay. Obviously it is. Usually, since the end is soldered, what you can do is pull the wire straight out and it won't catch anything. But the appropriate way, or the proper way, is to compress this washer to where the washer drops below the hole. And when that happens, then you can just slide the wire out. And this is also how you feed the wire in. And so just push it down with 2 fingers, lock it in place with one. You know, you can just hold it with one and it will stay. And then you can slide the wire out or pull it in. Now, if you care to, you can remove the screw in the retainer and you can pull the shift contact out. I'm going to, I'll do that off camera, but yeah, that is something you can remove. And remember, this bolt is actually still stock, but don't worry, I'll show you why that's fine. Also, as you prepare to remove the backing plate, the stator cover, or the timing chain cover, excuse me, the one behind the flywheel, you want to make sure that this guy is removed too. Now, some bikes differ in the way that they are set up. This one happens to have the rubber that that feeds into the case, like so, and it seals itself into the case and it goes into that hole. So make sure that you're out. And also this can get in the way too. You see how it's a rubber mount and it goes into the case. That can get in the way, so just pull that loose too. Okay, if you have a CDI, which is what I've been trying to do in this, I've been showing this engine in the rebuild, you can't put a chain wrench around this to lock it in place. You're going to have to fit the strap wrench between the sensor and the flywheel. Okay, so you have to lock the flywheel in place. I'm going to reiterate, do not use an impact wrench, because if you do, you can damage you can knock the crank out of balance. Of course, if you're rebuilding the crankshaft, don't worry. But like I said, if you're just looking at instructions on how to disassemble, don't use an impact wrench on that, because you can cause the crank pin to slip. and that's going to throw the crank out of balance. That's going to ruin the bottom end very quickly because it's not in balance. You're going to get vibrations, so beware of that. So lock the flywheel down and undo the nut. It's usually 14mm. I've already done it for time's sake. Okay, now this is where you're going to need your flywheel puller tool that I have showed you that you need in the beginning of the video. So what you're going to do is feed that into the flywheel. It is a reverse thread, okay, reverse thread, so you turn it anti-clockwise and it actually goes in. Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes you do it clockwise. So this particular version is actually reverse thread. So I'm going to put the flywheel puller in there now and show you. What we're going to do is you're going to feed this side. As you can see, the threads on here are inside of the flywheel, but if you have an electric start bike, the threads on the outside. This is a dual purpose flywheel puller. You can see it's got where you can thread on the outside, and it also has threads which will go on the inside. This one, as I said, the threads are going on the inside, and remember, this is an anti-clockwise thread, okay? So you're going to turn it anti-clockwise to tighten it. I know it feels weird, or you might think it's weird, but that is how you do it. Okay, once you get it snogged down, that's fine. You don't need to torque it down at all. Just make sure you get, you know, a decent amount of thread. You see how I've got many turns to get it in. There you go. So you have a decent amount of thread in there. That is good. And in your version might vary between. This is a hand crank version, obviously, with a knurled edge right here, and this is you thread this clockwise in, when you. But you might have one where it just has a head of a bolt, and you can attach it to a ratchet or a breaker bar or whatever. And so there's many different styles of this. And what you're going to do is, how I do this is I use my you can see that it has its two slots right here, so that you can slip a spanner over that. I slip the spanner over, and then I attach an extension or whatever, and then I give it a good amount of torque so that it will torque the flywheel loose. I'm going to do that off camera. Okay, now that I've torqued it, if you have an inner stator, so the flywheel looks like this. You will crack it loose. You can see. Okay, let's see if we can show you. Okay, you can see the flywheel is loose now. It's loose in the crankshaft, but it still feels tight. If it wobbles like this, you can pull it straight off, and let me show you if I can do this. It's going to be very difficult with one hand, but I want to show you that it's possible to pull it off. I almost got it. You see, I'm pulling them. Yeah, there we go. Oh, that's good. And you see, I pulled it off. The reason that it seemed to offer a lot of resistance is because of the magnets. Okay, my camera crashed. I'm not sure where I left off, and I don't know how much footage I've lost. But what I was trying to say was that the reason that the flywheel is there's a lot of resistance is because the stator and the magnets of the flywheel they're attracted to each other. So if the flywheel rattles, though, if you can detect any motion of the flywheel, then it is cracked loose already. That's all you need to know, and then you can pull it off completely. Okay, so that is just that's for non-electric starts, because electric start motors, the flywheel is on the other side, and there's nothing holding it in. So once you crack the flywheel loose, it will slip off. You just have to slip it over the sprag clutch, though it's not very tight, but there's a lot less resistance, just so you know. Okay, next there are these two screws, these big ones over here and here, that you're going to want to knock loose. Here they are. You're going to want to knock loose. You must use your impact driver. And by the way, if you see that seal kind of hanging off, I started taking it out, And then I thought, oh, I'm going to film me taking it out. So if you're wondering, so that was part of. Anyway, what you're going to do is fit the biggest bit you possibly can in there. Okay, so because these screws strip out very easily, it's just it's just what you're going to need to do, and you're going to use the impact screwdriver to knock them loose. I've already done that off camera, so take these screws out. Now, the easiest way I find to knock this plate off, you might see people saying, "Oh, okay, bang on this way, bang on it that way, back and forth. Just keep banging on it until it comes loose." I don't like that method at all. What I like to do is use my little L wrench. If you don't have this, it's okay. You can try and make any kind of implement. But I go to here, and this is why I like to pull off the top end first, is because it leaves this side open. And then what you can do, and when you change the cam chain as well, if you want to replace the cam chain, it doesn't hurt to take off the top end either. It makes it much easier to work on things, and so that's just my personal opinion on that. But what makes it really easy is what you can do is stick the L-shaped wrench like this in there, and then you push, you pull out. So you stick it in there this way, and then you pull out this way. You wedge it in there, and then you pull it outwards, and what that does is that leverages the cover off. See? And I actually did that with one hand. That was very easy. So you see, it's leveraged the cover off already, and you keep working at it with this method, and the cover will come off. I'm going to work it off on camera, but you understand the theory behind it. So you can see what we are doing is we're actually pushing against the cover from in here, and we're using this wrench to do so. I guess you call it a wrench. Okay, you see how we've gotten that loose, and now, usually at that point, you can just pull it completely off. So, of course, that is what we're going to do. Detach, if you haven't already, the boot in here, which fits inside here, and the neutral contact lead, which goes in there. And you can just simply pull off Stator cover like that. Okay, before you continue, one of them's actually fallen out, you can see. I actually knocked it out. There are two O-rings that go in here, right here and right here, and those go on the back of the plate where the screws go in. And so salvage these O-rings. You can usually reuse them, but of course they're very cheap, and if the O-rings are plentiful, just go get some. And so it's not that hard, but you salvage them if you want to reuse them, but it's just a note that they're going to be there, and you can pick them up. Okay, now what I do is I flip the engine up on its side like this. I'm sorry, I should have told you that it is a lot easier to undo the 14mm knot on this side of the engine where my finger is. And so if you, it's easier to do it when the engine is on the bike. And so I would remove that first. Or I would just loosen it first. You can pull the tensioner out if you want right away, and so I'll just show you in here. So after you undo the knot, beware that, you see I'm holding a spring in here because I want to show you that it really can boing out like that. And so this spring is a bit loaded, so if you try and undo the cap and you're not aware, it can shoot off. Just keep that in mind. Put the spring off to the side, and this rod, I've flipped the engine on its side like this just so I can show you without everything falling out at once. But if the engine is flat, then this rod is also going to come out too. And this rod, you can check for wear. There's a little divot, as you can see, but that's nothing earth-shattering. I'm actually going to reuse it. It's no big deal for this one. and there is your hardware. Of course, the cap, and your cap also has an aluminium washer on it, so don't lose that. Sorry, I don't know where I put it, but yeah, that is removing the tensioner rod. Now back to here. This particular wheel is not secured by anything, so I'd remove this. Anything that is not really secured, I just pull it off and put it, because it's easy to knock it off and you might lose it, so I don't want to do that. And here's, to remove the cam chain, this is what I do. You get it off the gear, wiggle it off and start pulling in the slack like this, you see. Pulling it through this side of the engine, pull the slack through. And once you do that, you notice it's all over the only place that it sits over is the camshaft, or the crankshaft. So all you need to do is slide it off. And I find that's the easiest way to remove the cam chain. If you're not going to replace this, I wrap it up in paper towels and I will put it as well with the other hardware. The last thing you're going to do is you're going to remove this knot. I've already pre-loosened it, so it's for the ease of the video. So you're going to remove the knot and the arm, and once the bolt and the arm comes off, that is going to complete all the hardware that you are going to need to remove on this side. Obviously we still have a pinion shaft seal in here, and we have the gear seal. If you would like to remove the gear seal, you can. You can do it to where you stick a flathead screwdriver on the inside, but you have to be careful not to score the outside of the housing, because if you do that, it's a potential for leaks. So what I actually do, and this destroys the seal by the way, is I put it on the inner lip of the seal and I make sure that I have gotten it against the rubber part, the outside rubber part. It's hard to explain this, but I put the seal so I don't push this all the way in like that. I just barely put it in past the inner lip of the seal, and then I put a lot of pressure to wrench the seal out, and it's going to start coming out on one side like this. I've already got this one started, and then it's going to be you pull more on this side and then more on this side and then more on this side, just back and forth. Take your time, you don't want to scratch the housing. And you can see we removed the seal. I order extra of these because it's just they're cheap, and it's nothing like keeping it. Why not spend the extra 50p, $1? Okay, but if you don't install new seals, or if you don't pull out the seal and it hasn't been leaking before, and you install the gear shaft fairly carefully, there's no need. Okay, so just heads up on that, you can do that too, as long as you slide the gear shaft in nice and smooth. There's no need for a new seal, so if you're on a super budget for whatever reason, that is possible. So I'm just going to move on after I put these parts away and organize them. We have all the hardware in here. You can see I mentioned I wrapped the cam chain up in a paper towel. That cam chain is almost brand new. I had just replaced it on this bike when I swapped the cylinder over, and so I'm wrapping that up so it stays up, because remember it's completely internally sealed, and so it's going to be first exposed to dirt when you open up the case. So I keep it wrapped up, and yeah, as I said, the hardware is all sorted out. Okay, we are going to separate the cases. The first thing we're going to do is you're going to you are going to undo the bolts, the case bolts, and they don't take a huge amount of torque to undo. You just crack them loose with your your L shaped wrench, and I've already pre-loosened these bolts, so that's why they're very loose. So as I said, done this for the sake of the video. Okay, here are the bolts. Obviously there's 7 of them. There's 3 different sizes, so take note. So that's what you get. As before, with the clutch cover bolts, what I like to do is I'll get one of these plastic containers and I grab them all in and just dump them in there like that. That way I know which one is for the case and which one is for the clutch. And I'm going to put this over here. If you're wondering what that is, that's just water. I like water, it's good for you. I get a bucket about this big, about 20 centimeters across, 25, I'm not sure the exact size. And I like to set the engine on its side. The reason is, the reason I use a bucket and I just don't set it on the table is obviously because of the crankshaft. The crankshaft sticks out, see? So you can't lay the engine flat. So if you can't lay the engine flat, then, well, it's harder to work on. So I just put the bucket over here. This engine will leak oil out the sides, so beware of that. So if you want to keep your bucket clean, throw a few scrap paper towels down there for absorption. So let's mount the engine now on the bucket. Okay, so you see how the engine is sitting now. It sits completely flat on the bucket, and you can see that it is on the edge. And that's good, that's what we want, because it makes it much easier for pulling off the, separating the cases and then taking the rest of the hardware off. Okay, so here's how you begin to separate the cases. There are 3 places, well, 4 technically, but 3 that usually hold the case. Actually there's more than that, but anyway, the crankshaft, this bearing is a tight fit, but it is not an interference fit, so that will provide some resistance. You have to lift it perfectly straight off to slide the crank out, so that will, this is an area of where you might have trouble taking it off. Also, where your input shaft fits in, that is going to, you have to slide it exactly square off of the shaft. There's also the output shaft on this side too, plus the bearings in the output shaft. There's also the gasket itself, which is going to be caked on, or at least sealing, and so you're going to have to knock it loose. And there's locating dowel pins, those little cylinder-looking things that go inside the case, and those are going to be providing a bit of resistance as well. So there's all these areas of resistance to get the case off. So you're going to have to, it's not going to be a single pull it off. The best way to do it is kind of see where it's binding, if it is binding at all, and then slowly work the case sideways, wiggle it back and forth until you are able to slide it off. Most of the time you're not going to be able to separate the cases at all unless you cut the gasket. So so you can see I have a razor blade, and what I like to do is I place it directly on the gasket itself. So put it directly on the gasket like so, and then take any kind of implement and start tapping it in. Okay, and you tap it in, and that way what's going to do is it's not going to scratch either side, but it's literally going to cut the gasket either in half or it's going to break it loose, and that is of course what you want. So when you tap it in and you break it loose, then what you do is once you are in, you turn the razor blade like this and you keep tapping with your hammer or whatever you've got, and it's going to get stuck here. So you're going to have to re-break the gasket. You're going to pull the blade out and then cut into here again, and then you're going to have to work your way all the way around, tapping of course, cutting the gasket loose, and then you are going to get stuck right here. See where that is? You're going to get stuck right here because there's another locating dowel pin. And so you just keep, as I said, you have the blade like this. Once it's inside, of course, keep tapping it. It's going to cut the gasket from the inside. Keep going, you're going to get stuck here, pull it out, tap, and by this point usually the engine starts to work itself loose, and the case works itself loose. But cut all the way around. See, cut all the way around with the razor blade, with the method I'm showing you. And I would actually do it in front of you, but I can't hold the camera. I don't have a tripod with me today. and also this case is already separated because I've done it off camera. So but that is the method of how you're going to separate the case. And once you do that, then what you can do is start using, you can actually use your dowels as leverage point, your head studs as leverage points, and you can holding one side down and grabbing the other side, work it against itself, and the case is going to go back and forth, kind of wiggle like this, and then you will be able to slip it off. Sorry for the vertical video. You can literally see I've just stacked a bunch of crap on top of my speakers to make a place to lay my phone down, so I can work on the work at removing the gasket from, or removing the cases. So I hope you see what I'm doing. This is the best angle I can possibly get it at, but you can see once the gasket has been cracked, I'm pulling this side of the case towards me, and I'm just trying to wiggle it loose. If you notice right here, there's a little bit of you can actually see that the case is starting to come apart from the actual from the crank bearing. So just continue to wiggle back and forth while exerting pressure to pull it off this way, and just keep at it, because as I said, there's these are pretty tight fitting, and there are many places they can bind. The main thing you want to do is lots of wiggling and lots of working, trying to separate you're going to, that's what you want to do, is keep wiggling until you have success in working the cases apart from each other. Sometimes you might actually have to recut the gasket, meaning you stick the razor blade in there and you go forward again. So that is that's just how it goes. It's not always smooth. It is broken loose in most parts except for right here. Let's see if I can show you. And you can see it's still completely stock here. There's no gap whatsoever, and so this is the area that this dowel pin is really stock. So this is what I want to focus on. Okay, I'm trying my best to show you all I can, but this is as far over as I can scoot the phone without it falling down. So you can see how now I managed to get that area I was showing you earlier loose. Now you can see the case is separated. And so what I'm doing is I'm maintaining pressure with this finger over here, trying to lift it up, and then I lift the case. I kind of feed my finger through the shaft right here. I make sure everything is clear, and then I lift the case off like this. Oh, it's getting stuck. The gasket is stuck, so I'm going to work the gasket off. If that happens, no big deal. There you go. Okay, so, and then lift the case off, and there you go. Something to note, when you pull off the engine, sometimes washers, it's actually right here, so sometimes the washers, they get stuck to this side of the case, and then as you are pulling the case off, you don't notice, and then as you turn around it falls down and it runs away. So ensure that you have all the washers. Refer to a diagram where the washers are in your bike, but to make sure that you don't lose them. They do get stuck here. There's spacers, sometimes they go on here too. Sometimes also this washer right here over the Kickstarter gets stuck over here because of the oil. So just make sure that this washer does not run away from the Kickstarter, and these washers don't get stuck to this side of the bearings. Okay, now that we are looking at the motor, you can see that I'm just going to pull the gasket out of the way, because I'm going to use that because it's new. Reuse it. Obviously you don't ever reuse a case gasket. There's just pretty much no point, although unless you have a fairly new engine. and you have a fairly new rebuild and a double-sided gasket like this, where this side is rubberized, oftentimes you can get a clean separation if you knock on the cases the right way, and there is no need to get a new gasket. The reason I like these, even if the gasket doesn't come off cleanly, is that it makes clean up a lot better. So even if it tears, it usually tears a lot less, and so you just need a little bit to use a little bit of the gasket scraper, pull that off, and it's, as I said, these make cleanup much easier. In fact, if you look at the bottom of my barrel over here, you can see the entire gasket has virtually separated off, and this barrel was used, it was run before, and it separated clean off. So I actually reused the gasket. I put a little bit of what's it called, sealant on the corner over here. That's why it tore right there, but the rest of the gasket I reused. And so don't worry, don't worry, that's what I like, the dual-sided gaskets. I always talk about these in my videos. It's just, if you have a chance, buy them. That's Honda OEM, usually they're the double-sided ones. Okay, as mentioned, this is where we stand right now. The first thing I usually take out is actually the Kickstarter, and the reason is because it's very easy. There's nothing holding it in. Don't forget this washer. It's very easy. I don't know if this actually does have a purpose or not. All I do know is that I've only forgotten it one time, and the one time I forgot, the Kickstarter did not work. Could have been a clutch failure at the same time. I have no idea, but that's all I know, is that this washer did not work. I left it off, and the Kickstarter did not work, so I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Obviously, start on the Kickstarter on the side. The next thing I pay attention to is any sort of washers, as like these. Refer to your diagram. Not all engines are the same of which washers go where, but remove these washers and the miscellaneous things that can come off, such as this. Oh, there you go. This is the stop that stops the you going from third to neutral when you're in top gear. Obviously no washer over here. Alright, the next part I'm going to remove is the crankshaft, because it too is very easy to remove. See, it's literally that easy. When you are storing your crankshaft though, the first thing you want to do, if you are reusing it, I recommend having it checked for run out, and also since you're this far, why not replace the con rod and the main bearings? There's just no point not doing it. This crankshaft only has a few thousand kilometers on it, and it's a completely original Japanese one. I'm going to check it for runoff, but there's whatever you do, put in a plastic bag and do not bang it. Don't hit it against anything or drop it, or even just don't set it, for example, on your pile of parts like that, because what you can do is, if you notice, there's that pin right there, and this is if you don't rebuild it, of course, but when you're storing it, don't have you're going to want to keep this thing completely. You can knock it out of balance, that's my point. So whenever you're storing a crankshaft, don't put it anywhere near a place where it can get knocked up. Actually, I didn't sound right, so that's just something to be aware of. I will wrap that up and put it in a bag and put it out of the way when I'm off camera, because I'm going to reuse the crankshaft in the state that it is in, because it is very good. The last thing, when you you can remove the oil pump drive. I'm going to show you after I take out the gearbox. The gearbox sometimes has gears that come off very easily, like this one. It's not really secured down by anything, so I pull that off. And if it is a freewheeling gear, meaning the gear is not attached to the shaft via splines, such as these splines right here. You see, it's just a smooth ball. There's going to be a washer here, so you can pull that off. And at this point, because remember, when we took apart, and the reason why I'm showing you to remove this hardware and such, is because if you remember, the bolt is actually still connected to this it's holding the drum against the case, and because of that you can't take it off, and you can't. I think you might be able to slide one of the shafts off. Let's see if we can do it. No, not looking likely. It's close. Maybe you can. I don't care to try anymore. So when you get to this point, what you can do is now, instead of wondering, hey, how can I undo that bolt without putting pressure on the shift forks? Here is your answer. Is you see this little recess? That is where that little where'd you go? This thing goes in to stop the crankshaft to stop the bike going from, you know, first to whatever gear, or third to neutral while you're driving. What you can do is you can actually is because there's a little recess in here, and you can rotate the gear shifter, and then you can jam this in here, and that way when you go around to the other side of the bolt, where the bolt is, you can undo the bolt and it's going to jam up against this, rather than the very delicate edges of the shift fork pushing against the collars and the cogs. And that way you can get around torquing against these shift forks and bending them. So we're going to do that now. Okay, when you undo this, this is going to jam up against that way. Okay, it's not going to go down, it's going to go upwards. So you're going to stick. It doesn't have to be this thing, of course, but just something to jam the drum from moving. And then with a bit of torque, you can. I'm going to do this off camera. And with a bit of torque, you can now see that the bolt is loose. So once the bolt is loose, you can remove this, put it down, and undo. We turn this around, and now that the bolt is loose, as you can see, we can undo it. And there you go, and it comes with a fat washer too. There's your hardware. Now lay this back down on its side. Okay, after we've laid it back down on its side, now what you can do is you can grab the entire gearbox and feed it out. It's going to need two hands really, but because there's three shafts where it's when I say shafts, I mean this side is a shaft. It fits in its little housing too, so it's not going to slip out. It's not going to just pull out. You're going to have to sort of wiggle it so that you can get it out of both bearings. Okay, I've wiggled this with two hands, and you can see that we have separated from the bearing. And this shaft on the left is the one that typically gets stuck. Stuck meaning that you have to really wiggle it out of the bearing, because you can see it goes in a long way. The last thing that we really need to do before there is these two locating dowels. If you want to remove them, you can. If they're mangled up or they look rusty and you don't want to leave them in there, you can do that, but these are fine. I'm going to leave them in there, and I'm going to clean off any of the gasket material. You know, you clean off your surfaces and whatnot. If you remove them, it makes it easier to clean, but hey, it's not necessary. So the last thing I'm going to do is flip this over, and I'm going to remove the oil pump drive. The way I do this is I jam this with a screwdriver. It's not that it's not the end of the world if you do that. So what you do is I take the flat end of a screwdriver, put it between one of these teeth, and just stick it in there like that. Now you see the gear itself cannot move. And so with that, now all you need to do is go to the other side with the gear shaft and undo the gear shaft with some pliers or whatnot. Okay, and you can see that this shaft is now separated, and you can ease the gear outside of the engine. I can't, my fingers are stuck, and so the gear is going to fall down in the bucket, just like that. And so there you go. This is separated, and this is basically all you need to do for now, until we get to cleaning the cases and whatnot. I might do a video on that, I'm not entirely sure. If you want the last thing, you can see your bearings are exposed now, your gearbox bearings. Be very, very careful if you want to remove these. Don't hit it with a hammer, okay? I'll just implore you, don't do that. What I like to do is clean the cases first. If you're going to replace them, clean off the cases and then stick it in an oven for about 15-20 minutes, and at around 200 degrees C. Afterwards, I have no idea what that is in Fahrenheit, but 200 degrees C. Just leave it in the oven, and what it's going to do is it's going to expand, the hole is going to expand bigger than the bearing itself, and then it should literally fall out onto your tray. Of course, you have to have the case going the other way. It has to be down like this for it to fall off, but the bearing will fall out. If it doesn't, you can tap it, and when I say tap, I mean super lightly, with a spoon or something, like the back end of a wooden spoon. You can tap on it and it will fall out, and that way you don't damage the race. No, not the race. The case at all. You don't break off chips of the housing or anything like that. Of course, the same goes for this